So it is great joy that we invite and say welcome to leading pastors in our city and Member of Parliament Steve Swart. Thank you very much, Pastor Neville and Wendy, for joining us today, and Steve, for your time as well. What has the reaction been following the presidential announcement on the resumption of church services?
Well, I think everybody is delighted that we can resume services, and of course we will do all the necessary things, the social distancing, the sanitizing and all of that. So there's been a good response. It's alleviated some of the frustration.
I can imagine. And Steve, as a Member of Parliament and somebody who represents the ACDP in Parliament, what's your take on it?
No, we do welcome it, and our leader, Reverend Meshwe, has been advocating for this, lobbying for it. He did write a submission to President Ramaphosa, as did many churches, many church organizations, and we are very pleased that the President has made the announcement, and we look forward to the regulations that will set out exactly what is entailed, but it is a step in the right direction.
Pastor McDonald, as a pastor of a large church, how will this decision impact your church directly because of numbers like 50 people and so forth?
Well, we work with what we've got. And so that's our mindset. We need to work with what we've got. And then, of course, from a positive perspective, we believe that we find the solution and people get healthier and we're able to, it's an unfolding thing. So I think we're working with what we've got. And as we have more information and we see what's unfolding in terms of people's health, I think that'll change the dynamic a little later.
That makes perfect sense. And then a question for you, Steve. In terms of many religious organizations that have adapted and have been innovative in their ability to function during both level 5 and level 4 of lockdown, should churches continue to use these means to function during alert level 3?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we've moved into the virtual platform area, but we do welcome the one-on-one ministry that does take place. I think there's a need for people to be able to worship together with all the due constraints relating to the hygiene protocols. But I think we've moved, a lot of people have been reached on the electronic platforms as well. And I think that's a reality. Even us as Parliament, we had historically yesterday the first virtual parliamentary meeting with a hybrid model, some physically in Parliament and others virtually. So I think this is something that is here to stay. But I do want to emphasize that the issue of the gatherings is very important with all due hygiene in place. I think what is also very important to emphasize is the fact that until this stage, pastors were not declared essential services. So one had to go through a process of registration with social development as well as with CIPRO, whether you were a public benefit organization or a non-profit organization, to be able to render services. And it was, in our view, very sad that many pastors were not able to minister one-on-one to sick people, dying people, people that were going through a very tough time. I know of situations where family members, pastors, were not able to minister to the dying, and those people had to die alone, and that to us was almost inhumane. So we welcome that together with the gradual opening of churches. I think it's very important. South Africa is a religious nation, and I'm very pleased that this has now been announced, and we look forward to the regulations today.
Thank you for that comment. Pastor Neville, in terms of your experience during lockdown level 5 and level 4, and of course there are these online platforms and many churches have gone that route, but in reality for you as a pastor of Good Hope Christian Center, what's it been like?
Well, I think the difficulty has been when people are struggling. So in the early part of the lockdown, after the first 14 days, I found a family, and this family was under lockdown. And during this period of time, it was a mother, a grandmother, and a young man he's already physically challenged. And under pressure, he struggles to talk, and then it becomes exacerbated, and with that then anger begins to mount. And so I received a call from the family because at this point in time it could become a jeopardizing and serious situation, and went across to the house to spend time with the family, to pray with the family, and to calm the situation down. And so these are some of the things we're seeing. We're seeing people struggling with depression. In this instance, our concern was it could have been something more serious because the contention was extremely great. And there were a number of people in the house. And our primary purpose was to calm the matter down and to get people to work together. So we've seen a number of these situations. Of course, with those who are sick, who are at home, I have continued to visit people who are sick at home, some with cancer, some on oxygen. And of course, I go in with all the necessary PPEs and all the rest of it to ensure that I'm not infecting them. But they are so glad just to know that somebody will take the time to come to their house. These are all functions where normally, if we were gathering, would be met, because although the virtual works well, not everyone has the access to the data. So the data is expensive, and not everyone has the facilities, for instance, that we have.
Sure, that really does paint a very clear picture for us. If you've just joined the conversation, we are joined via Skype with Member of Parliament Steve Swart, who is of the ACDP, also then Pastor Neville and Wendy McDonald from GHCC, or Good Hope Christian Centre. And it's such an honor and a privilege to be chatting to you at such a time. The focus is very much around the announcement from the President that churches would be able to do some sort of gathering, provided that it's 50 or less people, and also then, of course, the strict protocols around safety, around personal protection, hand sanitizing, etc., etc. And that really does pose an interesting question. Steve, if I can quickly turn my attention to you and to ask you this question, do you believe that religious organizations are sufficiently equipped with both the knowledge and the resources to function in that way during level 3?
I'm sure that religious organizations will adapt to the regulations and ensure that they do comply. It's pretty straightforward when it comes to social distancing and hygiene taking place. And of course, there have been people that have expressed concerns about them being a hotbed for infection. So obviously those people that are elderly or those people that have underlying sicknesses, I suppose they should be in church. If you're sick, that's where we pray for people that are sick. But obviously one needs to have wisdom in this regard, and one doesn't want infections to spread. But just as we had in Parliament yesterday, we kept our distances and we sanitized and everything, and it was fine. So I do think that churches will be able to adopt a very responsible attitude in this regard and to comply with the regulations. We've been given a window period. We don't want government to come back and say, no, now we're closing that off because churches or other religious organizations have not been compliant. So I would urge, and I'm sure Pastor Neville will agree with me that there will be compliance. I do question the number 50 because you've got mega churches, and there should be a proportionality when it comes to social distancing, I think. But we welcome the beginning of a gradual phase. We're already seeing, even in level 4, where people are prayer exercising. So there's a great need where people want to, I don't want to use the word gather, but exercise. But now we are going to have this, and I do think that it will be possible. But again, we need to emphasize that it's not obligatory. Nobody must feel that they are exposing themselves. It's the same as parents sending their children to school now. I'm getting a lot of calls of people who are very concerned. I'm saying, look, if you've got the slightest concern, don't go. Don't send your child to school. If children are expected to go to school, then surely responsible adults can go to a worship service and abide with the social distancing and the hygiene protocols. Now, I'm speaking from experience. As you know, I was tested positive. We locked down as a family. We tried as far as possible not to infect anyone else. Yesterday, when I went to Parliament, I had my letter of clearance, and it's all fine. So if we take due care, then, of course, we will be able to manage this. But I want to emphasize one point that I've said in Parliament. What we forget is that since the lockdown, there's been tragically almost 500 people have died of COVID-19. But there have been 50,000 people have died of other chronic diseases. So we should have some balance in this whole issue. Yes, this virus does present a threat. But what about everybody else? Tuberculosis, HIV, AIDS. Tragically, 500 people have died of COVID-19, the latest figures. But the figure that was given by Home Affairs to Parliament in this lockdown period is 50,000 people have died of other chronic diseases.
Nice.
And I have said this in Parliament. Why is there such an emphasis? And what about the tuberculosis patients, the HIV patients, the people with heart disease that are not able to access the hospital facilities or very difficult, and they're not able to access their medication? You know, we've got almost 7.9 million people, HIV AIDS in the country, only half of which are on medication, and of those, only half of them can get medication. One needs to have a balance, and I think just the churches reaching out and being able to distribute food and distribute, I think this is very key for us, and of course, for me, praying for protection, because that's what we experienced as a family. Yes, we took our vitamin C, we took our paracetamol, we took our zinc, we looked after ourselves, but it was the prayers that carried us through. It was our communion every day. It was relying on the word of God that said He will be with us, He'll carry us through, and we will be healed. And 80 to 90% of people will be healed of this. So I think we need to bring balance into it, and I think part of that is the reopening, the gradual reopening of the churches, because that is the sanctuary for people historically. That if you look at the 19 flu epidemic, 1919, it was the churches that rallied. And I think this is a wonderful rally call for all of us at this time.
Thank you so much. And it really does put things into perspective. If our own Department of Home Affairs is giving those figures, because one can easily focus on one aspect, but the other aspects of people struggling with health, struggling with just putting food on the table. So Pastor Neville, I'd like to bring you in there in terms of what has been your experience as the leader of a church and your congregants. How are they experiencing this? Because I've heard horror stories of people being laid off via a text message, and who knows when they will be able to find another job.
Well, the previous comments just on the health situation, I agree with that. I've had people in my church who needed medical assistance and who were turned away with serious chronic diseases, other than the virus, and were actually turned away. The other thing I see is people, let's say, who may need dialysis or something else like that, they are afraid now to go to hospital because there's kind of a word out there that if you go, you're going to get the virus. So I've been trying to deal with that fear and ensure that they go to a hospital and get the proper attention, and some of them have. As far as employment goes, yes, the employment situation is drastic. A number of small businesses we know, and I think many times the perception in a church is that the church comprises of a few wealthy people who support the church, but that's not the truth. It's just the rank and file normal person who comes and helps support the church. These are the people who will come and help you lay bricks when you're laying bricks, help you paint when you paint. And during this period of time, a gentleman who's been with me for many years with his own building company, because of the regulations, was unable to eat. And neither were his workers. And he called me and said, and he never asks for anything. I've known him for 20 years. And he said, would it be possible for you to bring some of the food packages around to my home? And I said, absolutely. I said, why didn't you tell me you had a need? Because I was ready to take money out of my own pocket to take care of him. And I don't want to get into what I personally do, but the church, we have been pushing to hand out food parcels. And there again, it's reliant on people who either bring food or donations. But we've fortunately been in the position, because we're a larger church, where we've been able to feed people on 3 different occasions. And each one of those occasions, we're taking out, and it's like a drop in the ocean, 200 to 300 bags of food, and each bag costs us about 300 Rand, and we're about to do it again because the need is so great that people are real hungry. And my greater concern beyond that is that we could be heading for a famine. If, as statistics say, we at the end of the season will have maybe 51% unemployed, and I'm sure the political people can help me better, but we already had, if my memory serves me correctly, about 27, 28% unemployed. We now have double that unemployed. which now will lead us to a hunger situation, a food situation. And so that's one of my greater concerns, that people are going hungry.
Yeah, that is a big concern. Steve, any comment on those comments from Pastor Neville?
No, absolutely. I agree with Pastor Neville. It's a massive concern. I think that the hard lockdown, whilst we all supported it in the beginning, has had a lot of questions now as we've been progressing as to why it's taken so long. It shouldn't be either or. It shouldn't be lives or livelihoods. It should be lives and livelihoods. And we are seeing small businesses closing down, big businesses closing down, and the starvation is spreading across the nation, and the economic impact is massive, massive, massive.
Well, that's where we're going to stop this interview. Thank you so much for your time. God bless everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.